Father, into your hands we commit our spirits, and we commit this little time of chattering. Amen. So there is a series of letters that have somehow made it through the ages that are between Paul and Seneca, primarily in the 50s of the first century, during the reign of Claudius and Nero. And these letters tell us a lot about the temperature of the empire, the attitude of Nero and his wife Poppaea in regards to Paul's teaching, and the stress that both of these men are under. It is said that Nero martyred Paul. I don't know that that's true or not. Paul probably has 5, 6, 7 different martyrdom stories, and that's just one of them. And Seneca himself during that time was commanded by Nero, who Seneca was his guardian for some 14 years. Nero commanded him later on to commit suicide, which he did. It was an agonizing suicide. He got into the hot tub, slit his wrists, and he was so old that the blood wouldn't come out. It took him a long time to die. So this during the reign again of Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, and that's better known as Claudius. He ruled from, 41 through 54. So these letters between Seneca and Paul were at a time that there was a transition between Claudius and Nero, and that would have to be in about 54. Claudius was a member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. He was born to Drusus and Antonia Minor, that is the younger, at Lugdunum in Gaul, where his father was stationed as a military legate. He was the first Roman emperor to be born outside Italy. Nonetheless, Claudius was an Italian of Sabine origins and a direct descendant of Julius Caesar. And of course, Augustus as well. Claudius was an older guy. See, he was born in 10 BC, so he came to the throne of Rome at the age of about 51. And the people knew Claudius as the afflicted brother of emperors that never came out into public, because Claudius had some problems. He had trouble walking. He would drool when he tried to talk, stutter badly. And he played the part of the retarded uncle. He played that part because he wanted not to lose his life like his nephew Caligula did just before him. He didn't want to be assassinated. He never thought he would become an emperor. His family made fun of him all the time. And he played the part, can we say this these days, of the retarded uncle? But in his seclusions, he read and wrote. He wrote histories of the world, histories of the Roman Empire. He was very, very interested in history between the times that he was drunk. And finally, when Nero died, the Praetorian Guard came looking for him because there was a faction in the Praetorian Guard that wanted an emperor who wouldn't give them much work to do, that they could get things over on. So of course, they're going to pick Claudius. Claudius was found in a room in the palace behind the curtains, a rat behind the curtains. That's how it was described. And Claudius said, no, no, no. And the Praetorian Guard said, you either come out here and accept that we are making you the emperor, or we're going to kill you right now. So he did go out. And Claudius, between Caligula and Nero, was generally pretty good, though he had a lot of people killed who he considered to be against his regime. But he was primarily a good adjudicator, a good emperor. And so if you ever get a chance to get on cable television and you see the old, what do you call that, television series, I, Claudius, I know you've seen this. I mean, you've seen at least the title. That would be worth you watching. It's a stage play of the life of Claudius. And it's funny, it's ruthless, and we're dealing with maybe 3 different emperors in that, especially the Emperor Tiberius and Caligula. Try to pick that up sometime, you'll enjoy it. Then we have Nero, we've talked a lot about him. His reign was from 54 through 68. He was Claudius' nephew, and he was called Uncle Claudius by Nero. Now, Nero put him in charge of things when Nero was reigning as the under emperor. And Nero was, let's see if I can get this straight. Nero was the son of Agrippina the younger, whom Claudius married for, I believe, a 3rd wife. And he was the one that was married to Messalina for quite some time, but he had to have her killed. And perhaps you remember why Messalina was killed. She was the whore of Babylon in a historical sense. Because when he was out of town up in Britain, she put on a contest. I'm sure I told you this. A contest of harlots to see who could do the much work in 24 hours. And she won. And she is the queen. She's Claudius' wife. And when he's gone, she does this. And also when he's gone, she married a guy named Silva, who was part of the royal court, but she wasn't divorced from Claudius. So what else could he do? He had her head chopped off. But then he married Agrippina, Nero's mother. I'm just trying to think of how Nero and Agrippina was his brother's daughter. Okay? Agrippina, his last wife, was his niece. You know what the Temple Scroll says about niece marriage. and the Dead Sea Scrolls say about niece marriage, because all of these rulers at this time married their nieces. We're also talking about Seneca. We started out with that. His name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca, known as the Younger or the Less. But we only know him today as Seneca. He's still well read today. He was the premier Stoic philosopher of that time. He was a statesman, a dramatist, satirist from the post-Augustan age of Latin literature. Like I said, he's still read today. You can get all his books. They all survived that I know of. There's one in particular that's read a lot today, and that is a book that he wrote when he was awaiting the act of killing himself. I think it's called Thoughts of Death. Now, Seneca was born 4 BC, very near the time of Joshua. He's from Cordoba, Spain, which was a part of the Roman Empire at that time. What did they call Spain? He died in 65 of his own hand in the bathtub in Rome. He was influenced by Socrates, Plato, Epicurus, Zeno, Ovid, and a lot of other philosophers, especially those of the Stoic variety. And when you hear Stoic, one thing you can think of is Mr. Spock on Star Trek, or maybe even Data on the later Star Trek. Spock was modeled after a Stoic, and Seneca was the lead Stoic of his time, very well read. His spouse was Pompeia Paulina. He was married from 50 AD to 65, the last 15 years of his life. You saw a great picture of him. It almost looks like, well, let's look at it again real quick. Looks like he just checked the bathwater. And yes, that portrait is contemporaneous with his life. So that's what he really looked like. And you can see he's elderly at that time. Yeah, I'll get around to it in a minute. Paul, you know his biography pretty well. One thing, Paul seems to be crying poor a lot. Maybe he was poor. Maybe he was an actual tent maker. Maybe that's just a euphemism for working for my own living. But if Seneca was one of his patrons, then Paul must have had something good, because Seneca was the richest man in the world. And he became rich also in the 50s while he's writing this correspondence after Claudius sent the armies and took himself to Britain. Claudius stayed in Gaul, but they conquered the British. The Romans conquered the British with a very bloody war up there. Famous people in that war, Boudica, the queen, and Caractacus, the king of the Druids, King Bran, and the 3 people that we find in 2 Timothy chapter 4, Claudius, Linus, and Rufus. Claudius and Linus were Druids. They were the offspring of Aurivigorus, the Silesian warrior. His family was captured and brought to Rome for trial and execution, along with Caractacus. And you remember his story. He got before the Senate, before his execution, and he talked him out of doing it. What happened? Claudius found mercy in his heart, put these people up, Claudia, Linus, Caractacus, up in the palace for as long as they wanted to stay there. And Rufus, of course, was Claudia's husband, a senator. Paul knew these people if 2 Timothy is, in fact, of Paul. That's really cool. In fact, Martial, the poet, writes a bawdy poem about Claudia and Rufus. Maybe you look up Martial sometime, M-A-R-T-I-A-L. Well, I know you're not interested in this, but anyway, there it is. This correspondence between Paul and Seneca existed at least as early as the 4th century, and there's no reason it didn't go back to the time of Paul and Seneca. Of course, most scholars on this are going to say, like they say of everything else, it's fake, it's pseudonymous, something like that, because they can't find copies in parchment that go back to the 1st century, although they have no way of telling, no way except a method called paleography, a method they use to date texts, paleography, which is in fact nothing more than guessing by looking at the script. So what they're really doing, they look at the script of a text, and then one of them says, eeny, beeny, chilly, meeny, the spirits are about to speak. Yes, 1st century. Okay, so that's how what paleography is good for. Jerome mentioned it. He said that it was read by many. And because of what Seneca had written previously, I know I'm a little slow tonight, Jerome puts Seneca in his catalog of Christian authors. He seems to think that somewhere along the end of his life, and in response to Paul's letters to him, he somehow became a Christian. Man, who knows? Maybe he did. We also get the word that Nero's wife, Poppaea Sabina, also became a Nazarene believer. I haven't been able to find any proof of that, but we do read in some places that Poppaea was greatly influenced by the Jewish faith. Okay, that's going to be Nazarene Judaism, because who's working up there in Rome? Undoubtedly, not just Paul, but a plethora of evangelists whose writings, for some reason, just went away. That Seneca admired Paul a lot, and that Jerome admired Seneca a lot. And he read some of Paul's writings to Nero. The young man that was an emperor started off good, but after a few years, debauched to the nth degree. I don't think if we knew the half of it, we could even believe somebody could be so debauched as Nero. So even back in the 9th century to the 12th to the 15th centuries, there were many, many of these manuscripts, and they were passing around even then. But as close as they can get to the original composition, the writing is poor. The writing is of the poorest kind, and there's no more question about that, but I haven't seen an actual manuscript. I've just seen reprints of this. And now I want to read it to you, and maybe I can just put this on for you to read too. You might be interested to note that Seneca's first name happens to be, anybody remember? Lucilius, Luke. Is that a coincidence? Or is this the Luke that supposedly wrote Acts of the Apostles? Why not? Seneca was a great writer. Seneca wrote thousands of works. Seneca was, if you don't pay any attention to his riches, he was a Stoic. He was a very moral man, and he wrote about morality all the time. Remember how he got his money. That is, after, I never got to this part, but Claudius had Britain in his hand. Seneca bought up all kinds of land in Britain, a lot of land, and rented it out to the British, rented them back their land at an exorbitant price. And then he, when times got rough, he reneged on it. So he was rich, even richer than Croesus. All right. Yeah, I'm a little slow tonight, sorry. First letter, and usually these have a date on them. Let me see if these have dates. No, I don't have them on there. I probably have 15 different called to Senecas here, different texts of it. I just happened to pull this one out. Here's the first one. I think it's about 54. Wasn't that the first year of Nero, 54? Let me go look up here in my notes again. 54. So Seneca was sent off into exile several times, and he was in exile until Nero's coming, and Nero's mother decided that Nero needed guidance because he was just a teenager when he came to the throne. And so she got in touch with Seneca on the Isle of Pandateria, where you sent people in exile to die, and said to him, you can come back if, as long as you two shall live, you become my son's guardian. So that got Seneca out of that awful place and back into the palace again. And he did well with Nero for quite some time. But then Nero's baser instincts got the better of him. Seneca to Paul, greeting. I believe, Paul, that you have been informed of the talk that I had yesterday with my Lucilius, that's funny, about the Apocrypha, or in parentheses, possibly the secret mysteries and other things. Oh, what does Paul have? He's got 12 or 15 mysteries in his writings. Look them up. For certain sharers in your teaching were with me. Well, that's interesting. So there's evangelists up there in the palace speaking with Seneca, or in his house probably. But there were a lot of Nazarenes there. Remember, Nero blamed the burning of Rome on them. For we had retired to the gardens of Sallust, where, because of us, those whom I speak of going in another direction saw and joined us. Certainly we wished for your presence, and I would have you know it. We were much refreshed by the reading of your book, by which I mean some of the many letters which you have addressed to some city or capital of a province, and which inculcate the moral life with admirable precepts. These thoughts, I take it, are not uttered by you, but through you, but surely sometimes both by you and through you. For such is the greatness of them, and they are instinct, that is warm, with such nobility, that I think whole generations, aeons of men could hardly suffice for the instilling and perfecting of them. I desire your good health, brother. Wow. Who was it that said, Paul, with your speaking, you would almost have me a Christian? King Agrippa II. That's what it sounds like. It's very complimentary. What book, I wonder, was he reading? Probably Romans. Okay. Paul writes back, same year. Paul to Seneca, greeting. I received your letter yesterday with delight and should have been able to answer it at once had I had by me the youth I meant to send to you. For you know when and by whom and at what moment and to whom things ought to be given and entrusted. I beg, therefore, that you will not think yourself neglected when I am respecting the dignity of your person. Does that sound like Paul? Absolutely. I can even see in that little bit several of the terms that Paul uses quite often, like ought to be, and used by Barnabas too in our Sunday studies. Barnabas is always saying, you ought to be this, or you ought to pay attention. Now, in that you somewhere write that you are pleased with my letter, or write that you are pleased with part of my letter, I think myself happy in the good opinion of such a man. For you would not say it, you, a critic, a sophist, a teacher of a great prince, and indeed of all, unless you spoke truth. Thanks for the compliment, in other words. I trust you may long be in health. Let me go over someplace since I got plenty of time this time. These bars always in the way. Thank you, Jackson. I'm pretty sure that Seneca is in the Bible. St. Paul, he quotes Seneca, I believe, 13 times. And he's got Seneca's brother in the New Testament, Gallio. So I wanted to see where Seneca is in the New Testament. But here's an article here, similar saying of Seneca and Jesus. Another witness to Jesus, Seneca and the Stoics. There must be a lot here, according to this. Gospel according to Seneca. But where is it in the New Testament? I was sure Seneca was in there someplace. Seneca in the writings of Paul. You know, if I put on ChatGPT, that entity would know immediately. Very, very intelligent. I'm sorry, maybe one of you have a paper concordance that you could look him up and tell me where he is. That would be right kind of you. So we've got one exchange between Paul and Seneca, very complimentary. Let's go to chat. What was Seneca's big mistake?
Sharing Paul's letters with Nero.
Yeah, and Acts 17:18. True. And how about Acts 10:23?
Yeah, the Acts 10:23 is wrong. Vicky posted Acts 17:18. Now some of the Epicurean as well as Stoic philosophers parlayed with him, and some said, whatever may this rook be wanting to say. So Acts 17:18, she's saying the Stoic philosophers mentioned there. Was he from there, you think, that group, or maybe
sure.
one similar?
Where was he at? In Thessalonica? They came to Thessalonica where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Of course, he didn't go to the Gentiles, except maybe Seneca, another synagogue of Jews.
It is in Athens, it says.
Okay.
This is when he went to the Supreme Court, basically.
All right.
Areopagus.
Yeah, Areopagus. Yeah.
Areopagus.
Mars Hill.
Right, like a Supreme Court, sort of.
Well, I had mentioned before that Nero spent a lot of time in Greece. And who was there with him but his guardian, Seneca? And of course, Nero was in Greece, not only to pilfer the antiques there, but he was in all these singing contests and musical contests there, which I mentioned that he won them all. He won a lot of cash. It's like having a biological man in a women's swimming race. Nero's here. We better let him have it because he'll kill us all. And it is said that he had some killed that didn't like his singing. And you know that Vespasian fell asleep in his singing and he got fired. That'd be great to be able to do that in some of your audiences. All right. Paul to Seneca. Is there two in a row from Paul? Seneca to Paul, Paul to Seneca. They seem like really good friends. Seneca to Paul, reading. My mouth's really dry. Seneca says, I have arranged some writings in a volume and given them their proper divisions. I'm also resolved to read them to Caesar. If only fortune be kind, that he may bring a new and interesting ear to the hearing. Perhaps you too will be there. Paul appealed to Caesar, right? That was the Caesar he was going to go see. Perhaps you too will be there. I think some of these people have missed little phrases like that and the evidence that they bring to the historicity of these letters. If not, I will at another time fix you a day that we may look over the work together. Indeed, I could not produce this writing to him without first conferring with you. If only that could be done without risk. Now that's the first time risk has come up here in the third letter. That you may know that you are not being neglected. Farewell, dearest Paul. There is a lot of hesitation here. It's like Nero knew who Paul was, and he wasn't giving Paul a lot of attention. But Seneca feels for Paul. He thinks Paul's heart desires attention from Nero. He says that you may know that you are not being neglected. Would Paul want to be seeing Nero? Well, of course he would, because he appeals to Nero as a Roman citizen. But, well, you can finish that. Paul to Annius Seneca, A-E, that's I sound. Greeting, here comes Paul. Whenever I hear your letters read, I think of you as present and imagine nothing else but that you are always with us. Sounds very much like Paul. As soon then as you begin to come, we shall see each other at close quarters. I desire your good health. Let's see, okay. This Lucilius Jr. here, who was mentioned up here someplace. Yeah, I had yesterday with my Lucilius. That would have been his son, because Seneca's name was Lucilius too. Maybe Seneca's son wrote the book of Acts. I still think it's Epaphroditus, but it looks like he was the procurator of Sicily during the reign of Nero, a friend and correspondent, maybe even the son of Seneca, and the author of Etna, which was a mountain in Greece, a poem that survives in a corrupt state. All right. Seneca to Paul, we did number 4, right? Yeah. We are much pained by your retirement. Is Paul retiring? What is it? What is it that causes you to, hope I'm doing right here, keep away? If it be the anger of the lady, because you have left the old rite and sect and have converted others, there will be a possibility of pleading with her that she may consider it as done on due reflection and not lightly. Well, that goes to the possibility that Poppaea had any power with her husband. This is the first sign of a problem. Paul's staying away. He is afraid of the anger of Poppaea, maybe. Remember, Poppaea was purportedly a believer. Perhaps Paul had gotten to her. How long was he in Rome? 2 years? Then he went to Britain, then he came back to Rome. And here Seneca is saying, admitting that you have left Judaism. Maybe she was enamored with Orthodox Judaism. And she's mad because he left. And have converted others to your sect. You might plead with her that she may consider it as done on due reflection and not lightly. All right, you had to think about this and maybe give her your reasons why you left. Here's Paul again. To Seneca and Lucilius. Of the subject on which you have written, I must not speak with pen and ink, of which the former marks out and draws somewhat, and the latter shows it clearly, especially as I know that among you, that is, in your homes and in you, there are those who understand me. Honors to be paid to all, and so much the more because men catch at opportunities to be offended. If we are patient with them, we shall certainly overcome them at every point, provided they be men or people who can be sorry for their actions. Farewell. Do you understand where this is coming from? It's really a piggyback off that last number 5 letter. And Paul is speaking in riddles. Riddles we don't have time to take up right now. But it would sure make a great paper or even a book. Seneca writes another. And I think this is where it starts coming out. I profess myself well content with the reading of your letters, which you sent to the Galatians, Corinthians, and Achaeans. The Achaeans are people that lived on the Greek peninsula. And may we so live together as you show yourself to be inspired with the divine frenzy. Or I think he's probably talking about ecstasis here, or ecstatic manifestations, divine manifestations. Horror, for it is the Holy Spirit, which is in you and high above you, which expresses these exalted and adorable thoughts. I will therefore have you careful of the other points, that the polish of the style may not be wanting to the majesty of the thought. And brother, not to conceal anything from you and have it on my conscience, I confess to you that the Augustus was moved by your views. Of course, that's Nero, the Augustus. When I read to him the beginning of the power that is in you, perhaps he meant your exordium about virtue, his words were these, that he could wonder that a man not regularly educated could think thus. I replied that the gods often speak by the mouths of the simple, not of those who try deceitfully to show what they can do by their learning. And when I cited him the example of Vatienus, the rustic, to whom 2 men appeared in the territory of Reate, and afterwards were recognized as Castor and Pollux, he appeared fully convinced. Speaking again of the Augustus. Now, what this stuff is, I don't know. Castor and Pollux is, of course, part of the Greek and Roman plethora of mythology. I don't know what it is. Maybe if you're here, Marcel, you could look that up sometime. Yes, we need to know. So here is a letter. We're almost done here. Oh, there's more. 12 of them. Okay, I have to hurry on a little bit. Seneca to Paul, greeting. I know that you are not so much disturbed on your own account by my letter to you on the showing of your letters to Caesar, as by the nature of things, which so calls away the minds of men from all right learning and conduct. He's making an excuse for Nero right there. So that I am not surprised, for I have learned this for certain by many examples. I believe he's talking about Nero, many examples of Nero's perfidy. Let us then act differently, and if in the past anything has been done carelessly, you will pardon it. I have sent you a book on elegance of expression. Farewell, dearest Paul. Again, do you have an idea that maybe somebody's reading, censoring Seneca's writing or reporting it? Most certainly they are. He's talking in riddles. And from Paul, whatever I write to you, and do not place my name after yours, see the heading, I do a serious thing and one unbefitting my persuasion. That is to say, when he writes his name on the letter and he puts his first. Or let's see, when I write to you and do not place my name after yours. Okay, he's got to place it after Seneca because he's going to say that Seneca is much more exalted than he is. For I ought, as I have often declared, to be all things to all men, and to observe in your person that which the Roman law has granted to the honor of the Senate, and choose the last place in writing, not striving to do as I please in a confused and disgraceful way. Farewell, most devoted of masters. Given on the 5th of the calends of July, Nero the 4th time, and Messala, consuls. That's how they showed the date in those days, and that's AD 58. So what's happening? This is 10 years more of Nero's reign. He's been reigning for 4 years. It's too early for him to go after Paul, maybe. Seneca to Paul, greeting. Hail, my dearest Paul. If you, so great a man, so beloved in all ways, be, I say not joined, but intimately associated with me and my name, it will indeed be well with your Seneca, since then you are the summit and topmost peak of all people. Would you not have me glad that I am so near you as to be counted a second self of yours? Do not then think that you are unworthy to be named first on the heading of letters, lest you make me think you are testing me rather than playing with me, especially as you know yourself to be a Roman citizen, for that rank is mine. Ah, would it were yours, and yours I would were mine. Is this some kind of hidden meaning? I haven't figured it out. So this is the next year, in 59, given on the 10th of the calends of April, Apriones and Capito councils, 59. In 14, there's 14. I looked at the 12. This is Seneca to Paul. Was there 2 in a row? Yes. Hail, my dearest Paul. Think you that I am not in sadness and grief, that your innocent people are so often condemned to suffer? Here's where it's coming. And next, that the whole people thinks you so callous and so prone to crime that you are supposed to be the authors of every misfortune in the city. Yet let us bear it patiently and content ourselves with what fortune brings until supreme happiness puts an end to our troubles. former ages had to bear the Macedonian, and is Philip's son, and after Darius, Dionysius, and our own times endured Caius, Caesar. Caius is Little Boots. Well, who was before Claudius? I can't think of his name now. His nickname, Little Boots. To all of whom their will was law. The source of the many fires which Rome suffers plain. But if humble men could speak out what the reason is, and if it were possible to speak without risk in this dark time, all would be plain to all. Christians and Jews are commonly executed as contrivers of the fire. Whoever the criminal is, whose pleasure is that of a butcher, and who veils himself with a lie, he is reserved for his due season. And as the best of men is sacrificed, the one for the many, so he, vowed to death for all, will be burned with fire. 132 houses and 4 blocks have been burned in 6 days. The 7th brought a pause. I pray you may be well, brother. Given the 5th of the calends of April, Frugi and Bassus consuls, 64. There's a jump there. And 64 was indeed the year of the fire. That's very suspicious. I don't know how anyone can judge this fake. I just don't. Seneca to Paul, 3rd in a row. Much in every part of your works is enclosed in allegory and enigma, and therefore the great force that is given you of matter and talent should be beautified. I do not say with elegance of words, but with a certain care. Nor should you fear what I remember Yolof said, that many who affect such things vitiate the thought and emasculate the strength of the matter. But I wish you would yield to me and humor the genius of Latin and give beauty to your noble words, that the great gift that has been granted you may be worthily treated by you. Farewell. Given on the day before Nonus of June, Nonus 9, Leo and Sabinus consuls. And some editor says that these guys were never consuls together, but how do we know? And 14, finally, from Paul to Seneca. I hope that we have some kind of closure here. For your meditations have been revealed those things which the Godhead has granted to few. With confidence, therefore, I sow in a field already fertile, a most prolific seed, not such matter as is liable to corruption, but the abiding word, an emanation from God who grows and abides forever. This your wisdom has attained, and you will see that it is unfailing, so as to judge that the laws of heathens and Israelites are to be shunned. You may become a new author by showing forth with the graces of rhetoric, the unblameable wisdom of Jesus Christos, which you, having well nigh attained it, will instill into the temporary monarch, his servants, his intimate friends. Yet the persuading of them will be a rough and difficult task, for many of them will hardly incline to your admonitions. Yet the word of God, if it be instilled into them, will be a vital gain, producing a new man, incorrupt, and an everlasting soul that shall hasten from hence to God. Farewell, Seneca, most dear to me, given on the calends of August, Leo and Sabinus consuls, Now, there's something behind this writing. There simply has to be. It's like skirting around or skirting around the fire, skirting around the corpse in the middle of the road. I wonder if somebody here, before we leave, could give us a little rundown of what you think about these letters. Do they sound authentic to you? Could they be? Okay, I'm going to take my picture off of here and wait for somebody else to come on.
We were talking about on the chat how I had wrote that when you were reading one of the earlier letters, how that was Seneca's big mistake was showing Paul's writings to Nero. Then later on in his last letter, I think it really I have to wonder if possibly he didn't hand Nero a scapegoat for the fires, which is evident from his sixth writing, or not sixth, but his last letter there. And also the fact that Paul's epistles, he lists a lot of people by name, and they have families and all that. So I mean, to me, it kind of seems that Paul was probably, I'll bet Paul was probably nervous about that. I would imagine probably spent a lot of time in prayer about that. Thank you, brother. That was awesome. Thank you very much.
I want to ask you something about what you just said. Can you explain that one more time? That intrigue. Try it again.
Okay, just a second. Let me put my headphones on.
I want to hear it again. Because you always come up with something interesting. I want to know what that is, if you don't mind. I'm here to learn, as are you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I was saying is that I think Seneca made a crucial mistake when he sent or showed those letters to Nero. And in his last letter, he kind of makes a play that Nero was blaming the Christians. And I think Paul was very nervous about that, because basically Seneca handed Nero a scapegoat for the sacking of Rome, somebody to blame, the Christians. And Paul, in his epistles, lists a lot of people, Christians, that is almost like a big list. They could have just handed Nero of people to pin blame on.
And you've got a bunch of them right there in your place.
That's what I think. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know that. That's just pure speculation, but it kind of would make sense. You know, it does make sense to me. If these are authentic.
It makes every bit of sense. I'm brainwashed by Quo Vadis. Quo Vadis, I think it's the Praetorian that gives him the idea, or Poppaea. One of those two gave him the idea. Seneca might have gave him the idea. By bringing that writing in, it's obvious that neither Poppaea nor Nero likes that idea. Probably if Nero's temperament was anything like he portrayed, he might have, when he heard those letters, put him down on the list for execution. I think. Good job. Anybody else? Did I miss a lot here in the chat? Nero blamed the fire on the Christians. Yes, I think so. Well, we are told one of the ways that Paul died, if it's possible for somebody to die several times, one of the ways was that he was executed along the Appian Way. Because he was a Roman citizen, he was mercifully had his head chopped off, recognizing now that your head keeps living for 30 seconds to a minute after it's chopped off. Oh, I think if I was off somewhere in Achaia and I got a letter like that from Seneca, I would certainly not be wanting to go around Rome. I'd probably quit writing to Seneca altogether. Because immediately there Seneca talks about how believers are being killed. I think even before he talks about the fire. And Vicky, you sent this passage from Acts. Yeah.
I did. It's from a blog post.
Oh.
If you go to that link, there's like, you can click on one of the questions about, is it in the Bible? And then that quote is, I just copied and pasted from there.
Okay. I'll read it.
I don't know what you want me to elaborate on, Brother Sean.
When you said to save Paul,
Oh, I meant, hang on, let me look at the, when you guys were saying, about all the names, Paul, all the names that Paul obviously talked about and mentioned and stuff. And because if Seneca and Paul were such chummy buddies, and so it would make sense that he would maybe use other names that Paul had mentioned so as to kind of take the possibility of Paul going down for it or being a part of those who went down for it. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I can express it correctly. In other words, if I name some names that Paul named, then nobody will think about Paul himself. Okay, never mind.
well, no, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. I see what you're trying to say. I don't know though.
I don't, that is, because if they were friends and Paul, you said Paul lists many believers in his epistles, giving him plenty of guilty names to blame. So it's kind of like, I didn't do it, he did it.
Oh, okay, I see what
I'm
you're
not
saying.
saying,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not saying Paul did it. I'm just saying if anybody's, I have a lot of brothers and stuff, and so I know how that goes. I didn't do it, he did it. And if you can get somebody looking at somebody else, then you're not going to even be in the equation. Is what I was wondering. If he was trying to because he had such an affection and respect for Paul, if he would, throw out some other names just in case anybody wanted to include Paul in a list of who to blame, is what I'm trying to say.
That may be. I think it might just be a case of Seneca actually believing and excited about possibly the gospel changing hearts of people, like even maybe Nero, he was thinking. And maybe he was just genuinely excited about that and kind of was a little presumptuous in his zeal, I guess you could say. I don't know. If we're looking at Seneca from the good perspective, like he wasn't nefarious or anything, I kind of get a feel of like maybe he's kind of excited to share this stuff with them in the hopes that it may change them and all that would bring with it if you did become quote unquote saved, so to say, or a believer. But I don't know. That's just my thoughts. I'm thinking out loud. Thank you, brother, Vicky and brother Jackson for doing this. This is awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, and I'm glad it made you think a little bit. I'm going to just do one more in this series, probably Thursday. And we'll look at some of the things that I think Paul is important for. Okay, and then we'll go on to something else if we want to. So thank you, bless your heart. I'm so happy to see you tonight, and if some thoughts come to mind later on, just get in touch with me. I'd love to talk to you.